For over 20 years, Jamila has supported mission-based organizations in the nonprofit and cooperative business sectors. She's passionate about supporting individuals and teams through highly participatory processes focused on organizational development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and justice-seeking strategies are centered in her approach to moving organizations towards transformational change. From 2012 to 21, she served in governance roles and then as executive director of the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. She holds a Master of Science degree in Organizational Dynamics from University of Pennsylvania and a BA in Urban Studies from Connecticut College. She serves on the board of Independence Public Media Foundation, Movement Alliance Project, and on the advisory boards of An Economy of Our Own and Altogether Now PA, and I'll let her pronounce the third one. She lives in Philadelphia. Welcome, Jamila. Really excited to have you with us.
Thanks, Eric. Hello, everybody. It's really good to see and know that so many of you are here participating as we wind down the year. Folks still showing up to do great work, good heart work. I'm sure everybody is in the throes of it as we end the year. And I think that's kind of where I want to kind of root our conversation. And Laurel, I was grateful for your reflection about solidarity economy and how it reflects to the personal, because I think that a part of the way that I want to kind of go through this talk with you all today is about the personal into the collective. And so let me just get myself ready to share this little slide deck to accompany the words I share. Let's see. And we're going to go here. All right. Can everybody see? As we consider the year ahead, how will we leverage what we have learned, grown through, and dreamed into being towards co-creating the world we want? And I'm inviting us to consider our principles as something to leverage as we continue our work ahead and do the reflection work that we're going to be doing. Many of us will probably be doing as the year wraps up. And I wanted to, thank you, Eric, for sharing a bit about my work. Fortunately, I'm not on all of those boards anymore. Oh my gosh, I'm just down to 2 now. But like many of you, I have many roles and different identities and wear many hats and have throughout my my career, throughout my life. In my work world these days, organizational development, this way that I really think about as how do people relate to one another in our efforts to fulfill the missions, the hopes, the dreams, the purposes of our organizations. I think organizations fundamentally are about the relationships that people are in while we're doing our work together. And I tend to focus on that, thinking about things like strategic planning and governance, in this intersection between philanthropy, cooperatives, and solidarity economy building. And, I do that also while I'm a mom. I have 4 grandkids. I have a husband. I love my home. Home is my favorite place to be. So much so that I started a project called the Black Women at Home Project so that I can hear more from other Black women about how they take care of themselves and allow home to be a source of recovery and sanctuary for them. So many of us are trodden down by the society at large, and we need spaces of sanctuary and respite. And communities and environments like this can sometimes be that for us, these spaces of respite. And like I said, I wanted to kind of focus a little bit on the personal, because it's hard for me to talk about solidarity economy building without thinking about where it starts for me. And for me, that's really like I didn't really connect this story until maybe about a good 7 or 8 years into my journey doing this work, where um, I was invited to do a talk, and somebody asked me, like, well, how did you get introduced to this? Like, where does this come from, this participation, your interest in solidarity economy and cooperatives and all of this? And I was like, and at first I thought it was just like, oh, I got a job at a food co-op one year, and that's how I got involved in this. And then I reflected a little bit about how I grew up. I grew up in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York called East New York. Is a majority Black, poor and working class community. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so many of the dynamics around gun violence and the crack era, all of those kinds of things were the backdrop of my growing up. And it's also true that I was part of a church community that visibilized a very different way of being in relationship to people through how it cared for this association of people came together to care for its community and to care for the people within it. And they did that. Some of the examples I remember of that was thinking about, they started an affordable housing project where they supported folks who traditionally have been unable to access the capital needed to buy a home, right? They worked with the city of New York and developed a project to do that. They bought land in upstate New York. I remember going up there as a kid to get out of the city and be able to have some respite in the woods. It was a little scary bringing a city kid out into the forest, what felt like the deep forest, but I'm sure it was just like, a few acres of the woods. But this was like the beginning of where I got to see how people can come together to meet their needs, right? And my work, probably around 2012, is when I kind of entered this field, working with cooperatives in particular. And thinking about this definition of a cooperative being, it's an association of people who come together to democratically own and control an enterprise because they have a common economic, social, and or cultural need that they're better off probably trying to meet together than waiting on somebody else to come save them, right? Or there's some kind of conditions usually where people aren't getting their needs met, and so they find themselves having to turn to one another to get some of their needs met. And I got involved in this work by working at a grocery food co-op in West Philadelphia called Mariposa Food Co-op. And I was hired as the membership coordinator, and I didn't know anything about cooperatives, but there were a group of cooperators from different co-ops in the city of Philadelphia, housing co-ops, food co-ops, the credit unions, the energy co-op, that were meeting to ask this question: what would happen if our co-ops organized together to figure out how to build a robust cooperative economy in our region? And so I started volunteering for that organization, in part because I wanted to figure out how to talk about co-ops to get people to join the food co-op I worked at. But then I also learned that this was a site of supporting people with their own self-determination, of allowing people and helping people identify how they can meet their needs together. And I then, got exposed or was introduced to Dr. Jessica Gordon Nemhart's book, Collective Courage, came out in about 2014. And that was, for me, the first time that I had an experience of learning about how Black folks in the United States were engaging with cooperative economic practices and using co-ops as a tool towards self-determination and to support and build thriving communities. And that work that I did with the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance, we did end up building an organization to help communities build new cooperatives, to help advocate for effective legislation and funding to support cooperative economic building in the city of Philadelphia. And we anchored a lot of that work in communities of color, amongst working class and poor people, as well as immigrants and refugees. And that was one of also the first time, a project that we did there called 20 Book Clubs, 20 Cooperative Business, became the first, a site of where I learned more about how Black people were utilizing land in the city to reclaim land for urban gardens. And this group, Soil Generation, was one of the groups that I worked with that really helped me connect the dots between land and food sovereignty and liberation. And so those kinds of things altogether kind of began to undergird some of the ways in which I began to work in this sector, including that I joined the board of the Food Co-op Initiative, which is an organization that supports startup food cooperatives, grocery stores throughout the United States. They host an annual conference called the Up and Coming Conference. And each year, increasingly, we saw more and more Black communities coming into this space, trying to create new grocery stores because traditional grocers would not come to their communities. This is where we see many communities having to live, we call them, to some degree, the federal government acknowledges this as food deserts, as these were accidental happenings where communities were left without healthy access to healthy and affordable food. We learn and we think about this as a system of actual food apartheid, right? Where decades of policy and disinvestment have contributed to the absence of accessible and healthy food in many of these communities. And so a lot of the work that I actually do these days has been in support of Black-led and serving food and land-based cooperatives throughout the United States. And I do this work with the Partnership Fund and helping to move money to these kinds of co-ops through what we call the Collective Courage Fund. And so as we're thinking about this, we talked about one of the reasons why people form co-ops is because they have a common economic need that they're trying to meet together. And we know that an economy is about this intersection of trying to get needs met, right? And producing a space where people can exchange things, right? So that they can get the things that they need. And economies, can happen in this smaller unit as a family, right? And we certainly see that nations have economies and regions have economies. We can think about the food economy, industries have economies. But to the point around that came up from some of your shareouts too, is that part of the challenge of our economy is that we are using up the resources that we need faster than the earth can regenerate them for us. And so we do, in fact, live in and are surviving on an extractive economy. And an economy based on extracting from a finite system faster than the capacity of the system to regenerate will eventually come to an end. So either through collapse or through our intentional reorganization. So we have an opportunity to decide what we want to do, how we want to do this work, because the transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And this is part of the language and framing around the just transition, which I think is complementary and indeed interrelated with the work of the solidarity economy. And so I think of cooperatives as part of the solidarity economy. I think it's also true that not all co-ops are a part of the solidarity economy. If the solidarity economy, we say that it is an organizing framework. It's aiming to move people together. It's an alternative to capitalism that's rooted in a core set of values. It is for people who wish to create change, right? That is based in our collective liberation, in terms of how the economic activities of our day-to-day lives are meeting our material needs. And it's for those of us who want to prioritize people and planet over endless profit and growth, right? It emerges from social movements in the 1990s that are coming from Latin America, Europe, and the global South. And the reason why I say not all co-ops are part of the solidarity economy, is because, like any industry and any activity that we engage in, co-ops can be co-opted by capitalism, right? So co-ops are not inherently, it's a tool, just like some of these other things here in terms of how people steward the land, how we exchange our time, how we participate in mutual aid projects. All these are tools of the solidarity economy. But undergirding the solidarity economy, again, isn't just about trying to get our needs met. It's really about how we do that work in relationship with one another. So we want to think about, we think about leverage. I think part of the title of this talk had to do with leverage points in your value chains. And so to think about how do we use something to their maximum advantage. And so part of my question and what I continuously wrestle with and think about is how do we leverage our values and principles towards the world that we want to create. And in particular, I wanted to also just kind of draw out the distinction between values and principles. Our values are our beliefs, right? And our beliefs might be what we believe today, but we also hold that our beliefs might have been different 10 years ago. And in 10 years, they might be different again. But our principles are these guidelines that help us achieve our values. If we say we believe it, how do we live into it? And our principles help us develop the tools to engage the activities that we need to live into our values, and also serve as a benchmark to help us see whether or not we're actually doing that. They are helping us see that we are making the change or that we're not making the change that we say we want according to our beliefs. They're helping us determine what is to be expected of our behavior and how we show up together. And again, they're helping us show us how to be in relationship with one another. And so I want to offer a little bit about the Solidarity Economy Principles Project. This is a set of work that is built on other projects where, people have said, and often I think organizations have this question of like, we know we have these beliefs, we have these values, but how do we know that we're doing it, right? And so the Solidarity Economy Principles Project emerged as a way to kind of like name the principles that would help us align with our values in our work doing solidarity economy, but to also identify some of the practices that would bring us along, like how do we actually do it, to name some of the practices to support those principles. And so we came up with these 5 areas around collective care, relationships and accountability, shared resources and shared vision, liberation culture, democracy and process, education and leadership development, as these 5 kind of anchor themes around the principles that we're living into in the solidarity economy. And these are just like some examples of what the principles look like. I think for me and the work that I do, again, connecting the personal with the organizational, one of the principles here that stands out to me is this one around we study and respect the traditions ancestors, and legacies of cooperative solidarity, economy, and social movements. The work that we do now, we know, is only built on top of the labor, contributions, and sacrifices of those who have come before us. So as we think about what it is that we're doing, we have to remember our past and our histories and bring that into our present. When we think about democracy and process in our work, right? We make decisions and organize work at the most local level possible by those directly impacted by the decisions. I heard as we were kind of coming out of this, coming into this discussion, I think Eric was referring to, a previous session that y'all had where people were referencing, how do we learn to listen to those? And when we're doing organizing work, that what looks good on paper isn't necessarily always what's the best for the communities that we are serving, right? So in thinking about democracy and process, if we value those things, then we have to believe and trust in the people that we aim to be in partnership with and to be working alongside, and believe that those who are most impacted by the issue are going to likely have are going to be our most important contributors to figuring out those solutions. And that's part of the democratic process. And this one probably is my favorite around education and leadership and development. I think the idea that for me, this principle around continually building new leadership within our organizations, it requires us to make investments in the people who are there. It requires us to think about the future, right? It requires us to think beyond ourselves and the positions that we are currently holding, and to be willing and able to prepare our organizations for the people who will be where we are someday. And this one around liberation culture, I'm just picking up my favorites here. This one around we move with reverence for life and intentionally make room for joy, pleasure, grief, and connection. Even in our organizational lives, we show up as human beings. We're there to do work, but our full lives include joy and pleasure. Our full lives include loss and hardship, and our full lives require us to have connection amongst one another. So figuring out ways to invest in that are really essential to how we live according to our principles. And lastly, sharing resources and sharing vision. I think that it's really important that we think about how we are networked. We have hyper local organizations, we have regional organizations, we have national organizations, we have international organizations as we're doing our work. And it's really important that we don't compete, like we try to find ways that we're not in competition with one another, but how we can share what we know and what we have with one another as we're going about doing our work across the different levels of the work that we're doing as well. And particularly for those that are, at the higher levels of our work, to ensure that we are sharing with those who are at the most, again, those who are leading at the most impacted level, right? That we are ensuring that they have the resources needed to do the work at that level. And so I know I'm at time. I spent a little bit too much time up front talking about a couple of things, but I'm hopeful that as you all are moving into the end of the year, and again, aiming to reflect on what is to come, that these principles, this little journey that I've shared with you, give you some encouragement, some inspiration into how to just continue to deepen in the work that you're doing with your coworkers and your colleagues, with the communities and people that you are serving, and that we think again about how not only our beliefs are of importance to the work that we are doing, but that we really ground our beliefs and anchor them in our practices and our structures for how we go about doing our work. Yeah, and we just thought, as again, it's the end of the year, a lot of us doing some reflection. Um, but wanted to just offer a few questions for you all to noodle on as you're, maybe if you have a continued curiosity to delve more into the solidarity economy principles. But I shared these five themes with you. I'm also happy to share the slide deck if that's helpful for folks to revisit that. And it'll also include a list of some additional resources around solidarity economy that might be of use. But just thinking about, I went over some of those themes, and sit and ask yourself maybe what's one of those themes that kind of resonated with you. Um, and thinking about how is it showing up in your organizational life, where maybe you see some gaps, or maybe where you're doing something really well around one or more of those themes. Think about, moving from your own personal curiosity to thinking about the groups that you are, or a group that you work with. What's a theme that you think might be interesting to explore with your colleagues, to deepen on, and again, maybe even to possibly study or learn more about? And if you were really like moved to say, I want to move this from like my own personal curiosity into how can I bring attention to this in my organization? What is a step you think you could take to invite others to being in conversation about this, right? The Solidarity Economy Principles Project is an invitation to, it's built within the solidarity economy model and in the framework. And not everybody is using that language or identifies with the solidarity economy itself, but there may still be aspects of those principles that might be useful to your organization wherever it sits. So it's an invitation to continue that thought process for yourself, but to also imagine how you might be able to, and around what you might be able to invite others into reflection and consideration about that as well.
Thank you. So we'll keep those up for just a second so folks can capture them and digest them a little bit, and then we'll take a step back and move towards closing for the day. Yeah, so whenever you're ready, Jamila, we can pull it down at your discretion. And um, so we've already been getting some appreciation in the chat, but I wanted to directly thank Jamila not only for showing up and sharing this and connecting it with all of these, the relational piece and the personal piece, and just grounding it so that we can kind of bring it to life and not just have it be like a poster on a wall. And just recognize all the thought that went into this collectively. And that was the thing that struck me the most about this, because often, I just did a conference session where the whole conference was framed around transformative action. So you got to think about what are people going to do next when they leave. And the thing that really struck me about this approach to next steps was to go towards community. That having an idea and then bringing it to a group and bringing it to life in that dialogue with the group is, I think, a unique direction for action steps that really struck me in this approach. So I just wanted to highlight that. Any closing comments to share, Jamila, before we open it up and turn it over to Andrew?
Thanks for the invitation. And I wish you all a happy new year and a good holiday season. And thanks for your time and attention today.